my name is Mary Marciano, and today I'm going to talk to you about glazing. So in front of me I have one of the cylinders I threw during the first demonstration on how to throw a cylinder on the potter's wheel. I also have a glaze brush. These brushes are specific for glazing, so if you want to actually go out and buy some glaze brushes, I'd recommend it. They just absorb more glaze, so it's easier to glaze with. I also have a little yellow sponge, the same sponge you use to clean your pots. You'll use this as well when it comes to cleaning the bottom of your cylinder. And so the first thing I want to talk to you about is why we glaze. So I have this bisqueware that we already bisque fired, and it's still absorbent. So if I were to put this in water, it would eventually absorb all that water. And so I can't eat or drink out of this. And so that's why we glaze, is to actually have all the pores of the clay soak up the glaze and it becomes usable and functional. There's different types of glazes. There's matte glazes, opaque glazes, glossy glazes. It depends on the function that you want your pot to function as. So for instance, if I want this to be a cup, I want to make sure I use a glossy glaze, not an opaque or a matte glaze, because matte glazes don't feel really nice when you go to drink out of them. They're kind of rough, and they also are harder to clean. So I'll be using some opaque that is glossy or has like a satin shine to it, and then also some glossy glazes on this. There's also, depending on the fire temperature, or the cone temperature that you're firing to, I should say, that depends on the type of glaze you're going to use. So we fired 05 in this studio, so I have my glazes. I prefer my Mako elements. I think they look like a high fire, but with a low fire temp. And how I know that they're an 05 or 06 cone is it says it right on the label. So depending on your kiln and just your overall materials that are in your studio or that you buy, I would definitely check out to see what cone fire you're firing to and make sure your glazes match that temperature. So in order to see our glazes, because right now malachite actually comes out green with like this like splotchy cool effect, and right now it's gray in the bottle, and then copper aventurine, which is this buddy, he is red in the bottle, but it actually comes out to be this brown and has this like gold sheen to it. So to find out what glazes look like after being fired, because we can't trust the bottle, is we make test tiles, which are these. So that is actually what malachite looks like. That's the gray bottle that I have. And then I also have my copper aventurine, which is like a brownish gold color. And then I actually have a test tile that shows the overlap of these two glazes. So it's recommended to have test tiles in your studio, because then you can see and plan and show others what glazes look like ahead of time, and it helps you visualize what your pot's gonna look like after. So I also have a banding wheel. Whenever I'm using or whenever I'm glazing a round object, it's really nice to have a banding wheel. Just helps me kind of evenly glaze. We always want to make sure to glaze 3 coats nice and even. You're gonna see, especially with painting, since I have these small bottles, I have to use a paintbrush. If you paint unevenly, you will see all those lines and strokes afterwards, so it's really important to kind of get as even as possible. So I'm going to start with the copper aventurine in the inside. It's always important to shake your glaze. It should be the consistency of like a thicker or a thinned down smoothie, I guess is what you could call it. You don't want it to be too runny. I've had artists say, like, if you dip your finger in it and you can't see the wrinkles on your finger, that's a good consistency. If you put an object inside and it drips off a few times, that's a good consistency. There's different ways people kind of measure to see if glaze is the correct consistency. These Mako elements are a little on the thick side, which is fine because I'm used to it. But for beginners, you just want to make sure you do 3 nice even coats. The more glaze you do, the more likely your glaze is going to run off your pot, and the least amount of coats, like if you only do 2 or 1 coat, you're not going to have enough and it's going to come out matte and you're going to have to reglaze and refire. So as I start to glaze, I'm just kind of going up from bottom to top, and you're going to notice, it may be kind of hard to tell on camera, but It's a little shiny, and you're going to notice that when it actually absorbs and it's dry, it looks matte, and you're ready to put on a second coat. It takes just a few minutes. The reason why I'm using this copper aventurine on the inside is because when it does pool, it creates those gold flecks in the glaze, and so when I put this glaze on the inside of something, more gold flecks happen. And so that's why I'm putting this on the outside, or in the inside, sorry. Now, when I go to glaze the outside, it's really important to make sure that you don't glaze the bottom of your pot, because this is what's going to sit on the kiln shelf, and any glaze that touches the kiln shelf is going to stick to the kiln shelf, and it's going to ruin your pot. You're probably going to have to break it in some way in order to get it off the kiln shelf. So when glaze is heated up, it is actually turned into a liquid, and then when it's cooled down, it becomes a solid mass. So I've got my 3 coats, and then on the outside towards the bottom is where I'm going to have the overlap of the test tile I showed you. So I'm actually going to start to glaze the outside too. So I'm going to leave about this much room for the malachite, just to see the malachite, then I'll have my overlap, and then you're going to see just the copper aventurine. You can never use the same brush for 2 different glazes, so I forgot to bring in a second brush for my malachite, so I'll have to clean it before dipping this brush into the malachite. You don't want to contaminate any glazes, because glazes have different chemicals, and if they react badly, then you just ruined a $30 bottle of glaze. So I'm going to go ahead and glaze the rest of this. Nice 3 coats on the outside, nice and even, making sure I get all the way to the bottom, because I'm going to clean the bottom with my little yellow sponge when I'm done. And then I'll grab another brush, and I'll show you how I'm going to finish off this piece, and then also how to clean the bottom and get ready for glaze firing. So I'll see you in a few minutes. Hey, I'm back, and I finished glazing with the copper aventurine, so I'm going to go ahead and start with the malachite. Again, I have a brand new, nice, clean brush. I'm going to shake my bottle of the malachite. And I'm going to glaze the lip and about till here down the outside. So I definitely want to make sure, if this is going to be a cup, I want to make sure that the lip is glazed really nice. That's the first thing you would feel when you start to drink from the cup. And again, just making sure I'm evenly coating all the way around. So do you see how it's really nice to have the banding wheel as a tool? If you don't have one, it's totally fine. Sometimes I put my hand on the inside and actually turn it that way when I start to glaze. Just a way to kind of evenly see everything on all sides. So when it comes to figuring out what type of combinations you want to do when layering glazes, I do think about the color wheel, so I wouldn't want to put orange or blue together, because when you mix those together you get like this nasty brown. But a lot of earth tones look really nice with each other, so blues and browns and greens always mix really well. And again, just making a slab of clay and creating these little test tiles that are flat, and on the back side I actually write what the glaze is, how many coats, so that someone else who's using it, who didn't create the test tile, can use that information when it comes to glazing their pots. In a sketchbook, I always write down the combinations that I did glaze and on what piece. That way later on, like from a year from now, if I say, oh, I really like the glaze I put on that cylinder, I can look back into my sketchbook and reuse that glaze. Or vice versa, if I hate the combination, then I know next time not to use it, because I wrote it down somewhere, and I wrote down, gross combo, don't use ever again. So I've got 3 good coats. I kind of dab the lip just to make sure it's got enough glaze. And you're going to notice now, let me put this down, close my lid. So I have my little yellow sponge. I have wrung it underwater and squeezed it out all the way. And I'm going to put my hand on the inside. And on the bottom, you're going to see how there's lots of glaze. And do you remember the bevel that we trimmed on our cylinders? This little bit right here, we cut that little corner off. That's what I want to clean all the way around. So if you remember me saying, make that bevel, so it's kind of a guide when it comes to cleaning your glazed pots, that's what you're using it for. So I take my sponge with my first finger, and that's the part that I'm pressing down. I want to try to get as even as possible all the way around, and not too high, but I always tell my kids to make sure that you have a sliver of bisque. What I mean by that is when I put it down on the table, I can actually bend down to eye level and see that there's a sliver of bisque on my pot. That means that I've cleaned up high enough, so even if the glaze chooses to run slightly, hopefully it won't run onto my kiln shelf. So get in the habit of checking the bottom of your pot and the sliver of bisque. Notice how the glaze is staining the bisqueware. That's totally fine. We just don't want any globs on it, so you want to kind of maybe use another clean sponge, wring this one out and use another clean sponge to really make sure that you don't have any globs of glaze on the bottom. So once I have glazed all my pots, cleaned all the bottom, then I would go ahead and start to load my kiln. Now I told you before that when it comes to making sure that nothing sticks to the kiln shelf, it still goes towards if a pot touches another pot and it's glaze fired, they're going to stick to each other. They're called sister pots. So you want to make sure that when you load your kiln that you have at least a finger width apart from each pot. It's different than bisque firing because you don't have any chemicals on the clay. So no, the clay doesn't stick to clay, but your glaze will definitely stick to itself if you put pieces next to each other on the kiln. So go ahead and practice glazing. You're going to get better at it over time. Your first few pots may not look so great, so if you want to use like your cylinders or something that you're not so proud of, glaze those first, fire them, see how well you did, and then go back and glaze your good stuff like your mugs or your altered cylinders. Let me know if you have any other questions. Otherwise, go practice.